Hi everyone. So I thought I'd continue my Explain Correctly series by comparing and contrasting the ENTP and the ENFJ in a way that hopefully will be explained correctly. So, the ENTP and ENFJ, also known as the ILE and EIE, how are they the same, first of all? Well, these are types which are actually often confused for one another. They are adjacent to each other in what is known as the benefit ring. And types from the benefit ring, they're types to have a sort of a benefactor beneficiary relationship with one another. And those who are adjacent to each other on that ring, they tend to be confused with each other in typing because they have certain things which show up which are very key to typing people, at least on a more superficial or holistic basis, that cause people to then confuse them. And they end up playing quite similar roles in some ways. So, yeah, quite a few similarities. Let me just go into what those are. Well, first of all, we have the fact that they are both energizers or extroverted types. They're both high energy, breadth oriented types, as opposed to integrators. They both broaden out, get things going, start things up, you could say. They're also both intuitors. They're both about the abstract, first and foremost. They're both far better at abstract information, ideas, possibilities, where things could or will eventually go, rather than what is more concrete and immediately observable. They are also clarity seekers. Now, this is about their values. They are both types which are about the clear communication of how things should be felt, sort of yay, boo emotions being spread out. They value extroverted ethics and introverted logic, you could say, extroverted feeling, introverted thinking in that respect. So yes, the emotions need to be very clearly expressed. They prefer it when emotions are expressed, and it's sort of a mood, a vibrant buzz, whatever it is. You see things in what are fun, what are more exciting versus, say, more boring, less exciting. At the same time, their logic, they prefer it when it is clearly interwoven into a coherent picture, where it is about theories, structures, frameworks for understanding, rather than something purely pragmatic, where it's whatever works. They like some kind of code or structure to understand how things fit together and make sense. And it all needs to make sense. It all needs to be coherent and internally consistent for it to be something which they would actually value as a framework of understanding. So, yeah, both clarity seekers as opposed to integrity seekers in that respect. So, yeah, another thing you could say is that they are both contrarian types. What does that mean? Well, where they are stubborn is in their ethics. They are both stubborn in their ethics. They are both about not only do they value extroverted ethics and not value introverted ethics, they are stubborn in that position, which means they take a very strong view on the need to express emotionality, about how things should be felt outside and around them, as opposed to personal attitudes. They place very little emphasis on how they personally feel towards things and the sustaining and maintaining of those attitudes. And they're far more about how are people reacting to what's being said? What is the mood? What is the feeling that they have created? As a result, they're also quite flexible when it comes to the logical side. They are, able to sort of take a view where they can be a bit sort of softer than other sort of clarity-seeking types towards extroverted logic. They'll do some of that if need be, but also they are types which are very sort of suggestible and sort of easily able to be convinced around the introverted logic in terms of what structures and frameworks to make sense of things with. So yes, you get types which are clarity seeking and contrarian, and you would get these types which are very much about the extroverted ethics, and so they're very much about the public mood, how people are reacting to them, and far less about their personal private attitudes and personal one-to-one relationships. They are far more of the people than of themselves and their closest one-to-one connections, essentially. Yes, another way in which they're the same is that they're both space locked. So space locked, this is about the asymmetries within them. they share a particular symmetry in common, which is that they both are especially good at the extroverted intuition, new ideas, possibilities, other ways or different ways of thinking about an issue. And they both are very much less capable with introverted sensation, the maintaining of day-to-day things, the aligning of smaller concrete detail in their day-to-day life. They are far more about the big ideas and less about the detail, essentially. And when you get that, essentially you've got both these types are far more about the public interactions, expressing different moods to elicit certain reactions in people. And while also both being really good at coming up with different ideas and possibilities, which means they end up sharing lots of ideas and possibilities in sort of interacting with people around them, but lacking sort of the day-to-day maintenance and the finer detail in their lives. So both these types really are the naturally idea-oriented people who are reaching towards trying to communicate something about these ideas and alternative ways of thinking to other people around them. So that in that way, they end up being very, very similar in that respect. You can find them both in sorts of professions which are often quite creative or even intellectual, where they are interacting with people and eliciting reactions as a result, which is why they can often be confused. But there are other ways in which they can be confused. And this comes to last two, we call Raynian dichotomies or type dichotomies. That first of all, they're both antithetic. By being antithetic, means that within their respective quadras, alpha quadra for the ENTP, beta quadra for the ENFJ, they are going through a journey of discovering what their values really are. They're almost transforming within themselves in some kind of way. For the ENTP, it's about discovering community. It's about discovering the social interpersonal aspect and coming out of a more sort of detached intellectual aspect into the more social, into the belonging and finding that belonging with other people. For the ENFJ, their journey is one of moving out from their sort of internal reflections on the nature of people towards real world impact and making that difference, making that change in some kind of visceral and concrete way. So yeah, both of them discover themselves, but they're discovering different aspects of themselves in aligning to their values. Both are going through that internal change, and by doing so, they're bringing something new. The ENTP is bringing something new in terms of the more intellectual to the realm of the social. They're bringing that sort of more free thinkingness, which keeps social harmony sustainable. And similarly, the ENFJ is bringing that deeper spiritual reflection to the realm of more concrete gains in the material world, thereby granting it that more spiritual dimension. And that leads me to the final dichotomy, which is that they're both clockwise. They are both types which are seeing social progress moving forwards in some kind of way. These are the two really transforming types of an intellectual and interpersonal outreaching way. They are the ones who are getting ideas or ways or messages out there that elicit some sort of transformation, both of themselves and of the society around them in some kind of way. For the ENTP, yes, it's usually leaning more intellectual. And the ENFJ usually leaning a bit more sort of material world, wealth and power, success sort of way. But they're both engaging with ideas, naturally good at ideas and reaching out to people and doing that, thereby being these transformative figures who are moving things forward in some kind of way, whether that is an Albert Einstein or that is more of a Martin Luther King. Both of them sort of fit into that kind of public-facing transformative figure role, who brings new ideas to the foreground, which is why they're so easily confused with one another. Now, how are they different? Well, first of all, they're different in that one is a logical type and one is an ethical type, or thinking and feeling, you could say. The ENTP is far better in the realm of logic. They are better with the facts. They're better with the theories and ways of framing, understanding things, making sense of them, explaining them in a coherent way. They are best at that, and they can often struggle with the more sort of interpersonal, finer aspects. They can often sort of put a foot wrong in the interpersonal relationships and sort of unintentionally blow things up in the sort of a social atmosphere. Whereas ENFJs, they're actually far more skilled at appealing to different audiences, finding ways of tapping into the mood of the moment to really create the outcome they want to see. But meanwhile, their logic is far more scattered, far more stream of consciousness, and they're far more likely to lean on others for a sense of logical structure into how things actually fit together and make sense. Yeah, so that's one way. Another way is about one is an irrational type, the other one's a rational type. The ENTP is irrational in that they are pursuing certain wants, certain desires, certain senses of how things could be. In the case of the ENTP specifically, it's about possibilities. They are driven by a desire to open up new possibilities, a sense of what could happen. They want to maximize the coulds, you could say. Whereas an ENFJ, it's more rational, it's more ought and should directed. That is motivating them. For them, it's about how should we be feeling? What is the emotional response to what is happening, and how can they set that emotional response? We should be happy. No, we should be actually tearing our hair out in despair at this. So ENFJ is far more inclined to decide what the mood ought to be, whereas an ENTP is far more likely to just be trying to, take it as a point of pride, but they can make you feel some kind of way. For them, it's more about opening up the possibilities. Of ENFJ, it really is how you are feeling is the important thing here for them, and they'll decide to make you feel the way they think you ought to feel. So one is, again, rational, whereas the ENTP is irrational. We also have the case where the ENTP is a more reductivistic type, and the ENFJ is more holistic. What do I mean by that? Well, ENTP, being intellectually based, they take a reductivistic view towards the intellectual, which is all about the different frameworks, ideas, and theories, right? Different possibilities, different ways of framing them, and each frame is also distinct from every other sort of frame. You can't just mix it all together because they might contradict. And one possibility is distinct from another possibility, because if one thing is possible and another thing is an alternative, by being an alternative, it is separate from the other alternative. So they are thinking in terms of different sort of fractals of possibilities that are then linked together by logical structures. Whereas the ENFJ is more holistic. It is about an overwhelming mood or feeling that is playing out over longer term trends and developments over time. That is a very holistic thing. There are no clear lines or boundaries in terms of what it is. It is a feeling. It is a mood. It is some kind of emotive energy that transcends any individual, but brings people together in some kind of way, with a sense of where things are then going, some kind of developing trend or outcome or path of meaning and significance. Again, far more vague in terms of what the exact outlines of that are. Other ways in which they're different, whereas the ENTP is a world accepting type, the ENFJ is a world rejecting type. This is the key difference between alphas and betas. Whereas I said that they're similar in terms of the clarity seeking side and that wanting things to be logically consistent and emotion to be clearly expressed. The alphas are far more about accepting the day-to-day around them and enjoying it and uncovering new possibilities about the world and exploring it. Whereas the betas, it's far more about making that impact. And it's far more about saying, no, it's not all the possibilities. There's some to be really driven by and find truly meaningful and significant and to pursue at the expense of other possibilities. So there's far more of a targeted and sort of concretely ambitious sense for an ENFJ compared to an ENTP, who's far more inclined to really just enjoy and explore. Another thing is that whereas the ENTP is determined, the ENFJ is exacting. So ENTP, in their desire to keep open possibilities, is actually quite stubborn in the idea that certain things are possible and need to be explored. It's very hard to discourage them from pursuing these possibilities. They won't be persuaded by others to say, no, that is not a possibility worth exploring. They really insist on keeping these things open and exploring them. But also, conversely, those few possibilities they're not exploring, it'd be quite difficult to get them to then explore those possibilities, because they are quite clear. It's quite clear to them what is possible and that what few things actually are not possible. Meanwhile, an ENFJ is actually far more able to be convinced around the realm of what is possible, what is likely or eventually going to happen, and what isn't. They have a sense of it. They're strong in this area, but they're very fluid as well in this area. And they tend to play quite a bit with introverted intuition and extroverted intuition together, whereas an ENTP takes far firmer stance on the broadening out of possibilities against the narrowing of possibilities. However, the ENTP is quite fluid in contrast with sensory stuff. They're very yielding to what is being done immediately around them. They don't care so much about their personal space and things being managed and taken and moved in all that sorts of different ways. That they're very, very yielding to other people taking the initiative there. They don't particularly care about it that much. They just want someone else to make it comfortable and enjoyable around them. The ENFJ, on the other hand, they are very set on the need to have a more intense level of activity. They are types which are naturally quite restless, find it very difficult just to relax and be calm and in flow in the moment, because they bring this sense of intensity. And in this intensity, they really feel they need to be making an impact. It needs to be done. And they do not like being told, for instance, to calm down, to dial down the level of intensity in that immediate moment. And similarly, they can actually get quite particular about things being messed around in their personal space. And they can often get quite very thrown off about suddenly finding that they might be sick or some sort of illness or anything maybe taking away their control over themselves in some kind of physical sense. There's a certain fragility there, which an ENTP doesn't really have. ENTPs are kind of detached from the need, from their bodily and physically and assertive insistences, whereas an ENFJ, they can be quite, no, you can't take this away from me. You won't take away my control over myself. You won't take away my particular freedom to act in the here and now as I want it. While, of course, ENFJs will quite happily act very decisively in a way which might push around and control other people. For them, they need to be the one who's deciding what's going on in their immediate physical environment, whereas an ENTP doesn't really care about that. They're far more about the possibilities rather than the actualities, whereas an ENFJ is far more insistent on the actualities, despite being more naturally aware of the possibilities and where things will eventually be going. So, yeah, that's why ENFJs are very exacting, whereas ENTPs are more determined in terms of the where things will eventually go. Another way in which they're different is that the ENTP is sight-locked and the ENFJ is speech-locked. What do I mean by that? Well, the ENFJ is clearly the master at extroverted feeling. They're very good at tapping into the mood, how people are reacting and responding to them. And that is what comes naturally to them, the expression of mood and feeling, and how people then react to that. They can play 4D chess with how people may react to something far along the future. ENTPs, they're more balanced in their use of extroverted feeling. They're not great at it. They actually have to learn to get better at it over time, but they can tap into it to a certain degree. For ENFJs, it's the be-all and end-all. ENTPs, it's something they can tap into. But the ENFJ, by it being their be-all and end-all, means they've sacrificed introverted thinking as something they can really access and do themselves. ENFJs really lack that sort of logical, coherent structure. They have, as I say, that more stream of consciousness. They can do the more sort of practical, pragmatic stuff. They can do that, but they really struggle actually structuring things and picking out the clear priorities themselves in the logical way of understanding what ought to be done logically. And yeah, ENTPs, no, they're far more balanced again in their introverted thinking alongside their extroverted feeling. They can switch between the sort of emotive appeal and the logically making sense of things, which is why ENTPs make such good explainers. Whereas ENFJs are far more about tapping straight into, your heart, your feeling, and motivating you straight that way. And leaning more on others for the more sort of intellectual, how things fit together and make sense support. But yeah, the ENTP, by being sight locked, instead, their asymmetry is far more about the pragmatics, the facts, how things work. And they're very, very good at taking in factual information. But that's very much at the expense for them of introverted feeling, how they personally feel, what their personal attitudes are. So ENTPs very rarely know how they personally feel towards things and how to really articulate their personal attitudes. They can do the public display of emotion to some degree, but they struggle with the very personal attitudes formation and maintaining their relationships. ENFJs, on the other hand, they're not great at the pragmatic, factual stuff, but they can do it. They can rally the facts to support their arguments should they need it, and think more pragmatically in the moment. But they can also manage the one-to-one relationships. They might not be so interested in doing so because they far prefer extroverted feeling, but they can handle that side. And it's not a total blind spot for them in the way that it is a blind spot for the ENTP. So yeah, you see those asymmetries. The ENTP has a clear asymmetry between extroverted thinking and introverted feeling, whereas the ENFJ's asymmetry is between extroverted feeling and introverted thinking. Another couple of dichotomies in which they're different. The ENTP is an identifier. The ENFJ is a transformer. What does that mean? Well, the ENTP, by being an alpha type, they're on an axis with the gammas about how close things should be to each other. The ENTP, it's very clear to them that things should be more close together, that really things should be brought together, and there should be oneness, there should be a sort of wholesome unity and harmony between all things and ways of understanding. Whereas the ENFJ, they're not interested in that kind of argument. For them, it's about the locus of change. For the ENFJ, specifically, their locus of change is going to be about the external. It's about making an impact, changing the world in some sort of impactful, long-lasting way. And so for them, that is the nature of the change which they want to see. And in pursuing that kind of change, you'll find that the ENTP is an affirmer, whereas the ENFJ is a denier. What does that mean? Well, the ENTP is affirming because in their way of bringing things together as an energizer as well is predominantly about extroverted intuition and extroverted feeling as values they want to push. So for them, it's all about saying yes to all the different possibilities. Everything is great. That is their affirming view of decency, but everything is good. That we need to say yes to all the different possibilities and welcome it all in, the more the merrier. The ENFJ, on the other hand, they're also energizers, but with these beta values, they are instead pushing extroverted feeling and extroverted sensation. So instead, they are taking a denying view in their transforming, which is basically about saying, well, what is my impact on the world through the sort of material and the interpersonal? And if they're looking to make an impact on the world through their material and interpersonal, they are taking that denying view towards a certain virtue, which is authenticity. And for them, authenticity of being, of truly existing in the world in some meaningful sense, it's not about simply being yourself. They're not so interested in just being themselves. And the ENFJ is interested instead in their reputation and interested in what they can create as an image of themselves that can be remembered for time immemorial. So ENFJ is often thinking, not in terms of how can I be true to how I personally feel in that moment? And instead, they're thinking in terms of how will people remember me from this? How will this resonate in people's understanding of what I'm doing? And so they look to package themselves and who they are far more. So in that respect, they're taking a denying view towards authenticity. Authenticity for them isn't something which comes. Instead, their idea of authentic self-expression is more about finding the aspects of themselves that they wish to express. And unless it is expressed, it might as well not exist to the ENFJ, hence the denying aspect. Whereas for ENTP, no, the decency is inherent in the thing. Things are decent, things are good. We need to say yes to them. Whereas ENFJ is taking a more sort of counter view of authenticity, which is that no, there is no actual authenticity. There's only in what is expressed, and they seek to exist through their expressions to others. Anyway, I hope that helps for understanding the difference between ENTP and ENFJ, and I hope that's been explained correctly to everyone. Anyway, thank you very much, and have a lovely rest of your day. Bye-bye.